History remembers Shaka Zulu as one of the greatest military leaders Africa ever produced. His name is etched into legend. The warrior king who transformed a small clan into a mighty empire, whose armies marched with ruthless discipline, and whose innovations changed the face of southern Africa. But behind the man, behind the legend, was a woman who shaped his destiny from the shadows. Her name was Mkabayi kaJama, and in many ways, she was both his greatest ally and his greatest enemy. Imagine a society where women were rarely permitted to take center stage in politics. In the traditional Zulu world, women's power was often limited to the domestic sphere or to the symbolic rituals of queenship. Yet Mkabayi shattered these expectations. She became what few dared to imagine, a woman who chose not to marry, who chose not to submit to any man, and instead dedicated her life to controlling the fate of her clan. She was the daughter of a king, the sister of a king, the aunt of a king, and the advisor to 3 different rulers. But she was more than just a royal by birth. She was a kingmaker, a strategist, and in the eyes of some, a ruthless manipulator. Oral tradition paints her as a woman of contradictions, respected for her wisdom, yet feared for her cruelty, praised for her loyalty to the Zulu kingdom, yet blamed for the deaths of her own kin. Mkabayi's story is one of survival in a world of constant betrayal, one of cold calculation in a culture where personal power meant life or death. And most of all, it is the story of a woman who made Shaka Zulu possible, yet who also helped end his reign. So who was this extraordinary woman? How did she rise to power in a man's world? And how could the same woman who brought Shaka to the throne also stand by as he was cut down? To answer these questions, we must go back to her beginnings, to a time when the Zulu were not yet an empire, when they were just one of many small clans scattered across the hills and valleys of KwaZulu-Natal. And at the center of that world was a young girl, born under a curse, who would defy destiny itself. This is the story of Mkabayi kaJama, the woman who created and destroyed Shaka Zulu. Before we dive deeper into the rise and fall of this remarkable woman, let me remind you, if you enjoy powerful stories from history brought to life, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Was Mkabayi a visionary leader or a ruthless schemer? I'd love to hear your take. Mkabayi's life began with a shadow. She was born around 1750, during the reign of her father, King Jama, leader of the small Zulu clan. The Zulu at that time were not yet the powerhouse we remember today. They were a relatively minor chiefdom, overshadowed by their neighbors living in scattered homesteads, bound by the rhythms of cattle, crops, and clan loyalty. But Mkabayi's birth was no ordinary event. She entered the world as part of a pair. She was a twin. And in Zulu tradition, twins carried a stigma. They were seen as unnatural, a disruption of cosmic order. Often one twin would be put to death at birth to prevent misfortune from befalling the entire clan. It was a cruel custom, but one deeply rooted in belief. King Jama faced this decision when his daughters were born. According to oral historians, he defied custom and spared both children. Perhaps it was fatherly love, perhaps an act of defiance against tradition. But in saving Mkabayi, Jama had unknowingly set in motion events that would alter history. Growing up, Mkabayi carried the weight of being a twin. People whispered that she was marked, that her presence was a curse. But rather than shrinking under that burden, she seemed to thrive on it. From an early age, she showed traits that set her apart: intelligence, boldness, and an almost frightening determination. Unlike other Zulu girls, she showed little interest in marriage. For women of her time, marriage was not just expected, it was a duty. Through marriage, alliances were forged, cattle exchanged, and political ties strengthened. Yet Mkabayi refused. Whether by instinct or by choice, she understood that marriage would bind her to another household, diminishing her influence. By rejecting it, she remained at the center of Zulu politics, tied only to her father's homestead. Her independence came at a cost. Some saw her as unfeminine, a woman who defied the natural order, but for Mkabayi, reputation mattered less than power. When her father died, the throne passed to her brother, Senzangakona, who would later father Shaka. But Senzangakona was young and inexperienced. Many feared he would not be able to hold the clan together, and so Mkabayi stepped forward. Though just a teenager, she began maneuvering behind the scenes, speaking to indunas, counselors, offering advice, and ensuring her brother's rule was respected. Already, she was becoming the power behind the throne. And already the Zulu were beginning to whisper her name, with both fear and respect. What began as survival, her refusal to marry, her insistence on holding influence, was transforming into something more. A vision. Mkabayi believed the Zulu could rise, if only they had the right leader. And in time, she would find the perfect candidate for that role. By the late 18th century, the Zulu remained small, overshadowed by larger clans like the Ndwandwe and Mthethwa. Their survival depended on clever alliances and cautious leadership. For Mkabayi, however, this was not enough. She dreamed of a stronger Zulu nation, one that could dominate rather than merely endure. Her brother Senzangakona was king, but his leadership was timid, more concerned with preserving stability than pursuing power. He fathered many sons by different wives, planting the seeds of future succession struggles. Among those sons was one child destined for greatness, though at the time, no one could have guessed it. That child was Shaka, born of Senzangakona and Nandi, a woman whose union with the king was not sanctioned. Their relationship was scandalous, and when Shaka was born, he and his mother were cast out. They wandered in hardship, mocked and mistreated, until Shaka found refuge under Dingiswayo, the ambitious chief of the Mthethwa. Meanwhile, back in the Zulu homestead, Senzangakona's death in 1816 created a vacuum. His designated heir, Siguyana, took the throne. But Siguyana's position was precarious. He lacked strong allies, and his claim was contested by Shaka, who by then had grown into a formidable warrior under Dingiswayo's mentorship. It was here that Mkabayi made her most decisive move. She saw in Shaka what few others did: the brilliance of a military innovator, the fire of an unbreakable will, and the charisma to unite men under his command. Where others saw an illegitimate child, she saw the future of the Zulu. And so, she acted. Oral tradition differs on the details. Some say she orchestrated Siguyana's assassination. Others say she merely cleared the path. But one thing is certain: Mkabayi placed Shaka on the throne. With Dingiswayo's backing, Shaka returned to claim his father's seat. When Siguyana mysteriously died, the throne passed to Shaka without opposition. It was an unprecedented act. Never before had an illegitimate son ascended to rule the Zulu. But with Mkabayi's cunning and Dingiswayo's support, the impossible became reality. The day Shaka became king in 1816 marked the beginning of a new era. The Zulu were no longer a minor clan. They were about to become an empire. And standing in the shadows of that moment was Mkabayi, the kingmaker. When Shaka ascended the throne, he did not immediately become the fearsome emperor we know from legend. His reign began with uncertainty. He was young, his position was precarious, and he faced enemies both within and outside the Zulu clan. But he had one advantage no other Zulu ruler had ever enjoyed: the guidance of Mkabayi. From the beginning, she became his closest political advisor. Where Shaka was brilliant in military affairs, Mkabayi was unmatched in politics. She understood the intricacies of clan alliances, the power of cattle diplomacy, and the art of silencing dissent before it grew into rebellion. While Shaka drilled his warriors in the use of the ikla, the short stabbing spear he had perfected, Mkabayi worked behind the scenes. She spoke with indunas, reinforced loyalty among the homesteads, and managed disputes that could destabilize the throne. Many historians believe that in those early years it was her cunning, not just Shaka's military genius, that ensured the Zulu kingdom did not collapse before it began. But Mkabayi was not merely a gentle counselor. She was ruthless. Oral accounts describe her as a woman unafraid to order executions if she sensed betrayal. Rivals within the royal family who questioned Shaka's legitimacy often disappeared, their deaths whispered about in the night. And though Shaka himself was capable of brutality, it was said that Mkabayi sometimes pressed for harsher measures than even he considered necessary. She also became something of a stabilizer. Shaka's ambitions were boundless, but they sometimes clashed with traditional customs. When his reforms caused shock among elders, it was often Mkabayi who stepped in to defend his decisions. "This is the way of the future," she is said to have argued. "If you fear him, then serve him, for he is the man who will make the Zulu great." In many ways, she was Shaka's political general, fighting battles not on the field, but in the kraal, where whispers could kill more effectively than spears. Their partnership was formidable. Together, they began to transform the Zulu from a minor clan into a rising force. Shaka's warriors crushed rivals with new tactics, while Mkabayi ensured that every victory translated into political control. But their relationship was never simple. Shaka may have owed his throne to her, but he was not a man who liked to share power. As the years passed, he became increasingly independent, increasingly suspicious of those around him. And Mkabayi, ever pragmatic, began to see that the very man she had raised to greatness might one day plunge the Zulu into ruin. The alliance that had built the kingdom was also sowing the seeds of future betrayal. By the early 1820s, the Zulu were no longer a small clan. They had become a force that sent shockwaves across southern Africa. Shaka's regiments, organized by age and trained with relentless discipline, moved like machines of war. They abandoned the old throwing spear and adopted his deadly short stabbing spear, designed for close combat. Battles became massacres, and the Zulu expanded at a breathtaking pace. This period gave rise to the Mfakane, the scattering. Entire communities were uprooted as Shaka's wars displaced populations. Some fled hundreds of miles, creating ripple effects that reshaped the map of southern Africa. While Shaka's name became synonymous with terror and conquest, Mkabayi remained in the background, ensuring that the spoils of war, cattle, captives, land, were managed wisely. Yet for all their success, storm clouds were gathering. Shaka was not just a conqueror. He was also a man consumed by suspicion. His punishments grew harsher, his paranoia deeper. He executed sub-chiefs on the slightest suspicion of disloyalty. He demanded absolute obedience from his warriors, and those who faltered faced death. For Mkabayi, who had once believed in Shaka's vision, doubt began to creep in. She could not deny his greatness. He had made the Zulu feared across the land. But she also could not ignore the growing resentment among his people. The breaking point came in 1827. With the death of Shaka's beloved mother, Nandi. Shaka's grief was overwhelming, but instead of mourning in silence, he imposed it upon the entire kingdom. Crops were not planted. Pregnant women were executed for daring to bring new life while the mother of the king lay dead. Thousands starved. It was a moment that shook the Zulu nation. For many, Shaka crossed the line from greatness into madness. And though Mkabayi remained silent in public, she is believed to have understood that the stability of the kingdom was slipping away. The same woman who had once said, "Serve him, for he will make the Zulu great," now watched as he risked destroying all they had built. By 1828, discontent had spread like wildfire. Shaka's generals, once loyal, began to plot. His half-brothers, Dingaan and Malangana, whispered of rebellion. Even ordinary warriors, exhausted by endless campaigns and harsh discipline, longed for change. And standing in the middle of it all was Mkabayi. What role did she play in the plot that killed Shaka? Historians and oral traditions disagree. Some say she merely turned a blind eye, unwilling to intervene as the conspirators sharpened their spears. Others suggest she was an active participant, whispering encouragement, telling Dingaan and Malangana that the time had come. What is clear is that by then, Mkabayi had concluded that Shaka's reign threatened the survival of the Zulu. His brilliance had built the empire, but his paranoia was tearing it apart. If he lived much longer, the Zulu might collapse under the weight of his cruelty. So when the conspirators struck, Mkabayi did nothing. The scene is etched into legend. September 1828, Kwadukuza, Shaka's royal kraal. Shaka was summoned by his half-brothers. Suspicion clouded his mind, but he came. As he stood in conversation, Dingaan and Malangana moved close. Spears flashed. The great king fell. His cries of betrayal echoed in the kraal as warriors stood frozen, unable or unwilling to save him. The man who had reshaped southern Africa was dead, and his aunt, the woman who had placed the crown upon his head 12 years earlier, stood by in silence. After Shaka's death, the Zulu kingdom did not crumble. Instead, it entered another era, this time under the rule of Dingaan, and once again Mkabayi remained at the center of power. She had now survived 3 reigns, her brother Senzanga Kona, her nephew Shaka, and now another nephew, Dingaan. Few figures in Zulu history wielded such longevity and influence. Dingaan's rule was unstable from the start. He lacked Shaka's military brilliance and often relied on treachery rather than strength. But with Mkabayi's counsel, he managed to consolidate power. She remained his advisor, though she never fully trusted him. Oral tradition suggests that when Dingaan later ordered the massacre of Piet Retief and the Voortrekkers, Mkabayi privately warned against such rashness, knowing it would provoke retaliation. Her survival was remarkable. In a world where rivals were swiftly eliminated, she endured, perhaps because every king who came to power understood her value. She was not merely a relic of the past, she was the keeper of memory, the strategist who knew how to navigate politics better than any man. Later, when Dingaan was defeated by his brother Mpandi, Mkabayi continued to exert influence. She never wore a crown, but her authority was undeniable. Mkabayi lived well into the 1840s, long enough to see the Zulu kingdom reach the height of its power and then confront the encroaching forces of European settlers. By the time of her death, she had outlived nearly everyone she had once shaped. How should we remember her? Was she a villain, a schemer who manipulated her family for power? Or was she a savior, the woman who ensured the Zulu survived and rose to greatness? To many, she remains a paradox. On one hand, she never married, never bore children, and dedicated her entire life to the kingdom. On the other, she is remembered as ruthless, willing to sacrifice anyone, even Shaka himself, for the sake of survival. Without her, there might never have been a Shaka Zulu. Without her, the Zulu kingdom might never have risen to prominence. And without her, Shaka might never have fallen. Mkabayi kaJama stands as one of history's most complex figures, a woman who stepped beyond the limits of her time, who bent tradition to her will, and who shaped the destiny of a nation from the shadows. She was, in every sense, the woman who created and destroyed Shaka Zulu. History often remembers men with spears, crowns, and armies. But sometimes, the most powerful figures are those whose weapons are whispers, decisions, and unyielding will. Mkabayi kaJama reminds us that behind every legend, there may be another story. A story of someone who never wore the crown, but shaped the kingdom more than the king himself. She was feared. She was respected. She was never forgotten. Her life is a lesson in power, in the price of ambition, and in the shadowy line between creation and destruction. For in the end, Mkabayi did not just shape Shaka's destiny. She shaped the destiny of the Zulu nation.